So now we know about the basics of Birkhoff and our introduction to Birkhoff and his style. We started by looking at a smaller piece to just do some duologues with, and this was East. East was about two characters, Mike and Les. Mike and Les are two sort of gang lords in the East End of London. So again, it's the use of Cockney accent, it's the use of over masculinity, gestures, and they have a lot of physicalisation that can be shown. We looked at the ideas that we'd learned in previous lessons, so about the staccato and defined movement, but also about physical fighting. So the fighting didn't even need to make contact; it's just the fighting and the movement itself was defined enough to have a defined response. So as long as you had that definition and movement, you said that often with the movements they have to have a defined start and finish, and that was something that we were going to explore through this piece that we're going to look at. So reading through it and understanding what it's about, it's basically how these two gang lords of the East End met, how they're both quite rough and tough lads. We already knew a little bit about the language when first looks at Birkhoff and what we'd researched, but from looking at this you can tell that he uses a lot of grotesque language, a lot of language that would often happen internally, and not so much be projected onto an audience. A lot of stuff that pushes the limits of theatre, and so when looking at this we looked more about how at first thoughts we could understand how each movement could be linked to the words and how the language could be used more, because beforehand we'd looked more about the movement and less about the language. This was exploring the language more and how it linked together to create a piece, and not just the Shakespearean kind of language with the Cockney accent and the movement on their own, pushing them together. We've started rehearsals on this. We're doing the duologues and it's me and Hannah. The work itself is quite difficult to get into the style. We've researched a little bit about how to put the two together. We often find that when doing the movements you've got to do what the words feel, and we've been trying to get into that, and Chip's been helping everyone in the class a lot with how the movement has to represent the words, not act out the words, and how that the feel of the words should come across. When looking at the script at first thoughts, we've also got quite a sexual nature as well, but also quite a rough and tough nature. We got to choose an 1 minute piece from the extract to do and memorise. So we looked at how also we could introduce working with a prop. Quite a lot of people were looking at using chairs or a riser, a couple of chairs. The interaction between the two characters is very relevant, and I think that using the exercises that we've done before, like the fighting exercises and the table laying exercise, we looked at character interaction. I think this needs to show how these two are were first opposing, because the story is that they were opposing and fighting over this woman, Sylve, and then actually became friends from that. So I think the whole idea is that there needs to be a clear interaction, that sort of interaction between them both, and I think we could portray this through our gestures towards each other, through our proxemics, but also not focusing on that too much, because the words will lend themselves to certain actions that'll show the interaction between the two characters. To build on this, we could look more at how tone could create a relationship between the two of them. I think because we haven't really studied language as abstract as this before, Shakespeare is very an interesting quite language in itself. We haven't really studied anything that lends itself to a sort of structure of the shape, so a slow bit and a fast bit. We haven't really looked at that very much because obviously we've done Anatomy of a Suicide and that was really realistic. This is definitely more abstract, so we need to focus on more how we're going to say the words and the feelings behind the words rather than the characters' motivations behind the words. The words will lend themselves to certain motivations and understanding of the characters. So yeah, I think we'll look more onto that, and as we go through the rehearsal process over a couple of lessons on this, we'll have a deeper understanding to Berkoff's style and the movement linking to the language, to go on to the next piece that we'll do.